You're going to start the recording.
Progress.
Oh, okay. Welcome to our October 19th meeting for the Sacramento Valley chapter of the IABA. We have a full agenda, so I'll just get started right away. The first thing I want to do, as always, is thank the Sacramento Valley chapter board members. Everyone is very well engaged, but Steve is especially engaged and does a lot of great work in planning our events, getting out the notice to everybody, and following up afterwards. So Steve, thank you for all that you do. We also have on the call Nora O'Reilly. She's our VP of Marketing. Our current VP of Education, Jaron Landavora. I can't tell if he's on, but Jaron, it's great having Jaron on our board. He's CBAP certified. He understands, the value of our group and the value of our study group. Priscilla Simon is our VP of Membership. She's an overachiever. She's got a lot going on. She wants to continue her education into next year, so she's not continuing on the board, and she's going to focus in on that. But Priscilla is always engaged and has a lot of great ideas. Anna White is our treasurer, so we're looking forward to her continuing on into next year with us. And Travis Holland is our secretary, and again, if I look over to the right, then I'll be looking away from the camera, but I'm sure Travis probably is on. He's over in Utah now and continuing with us as our secretary. So appreciate that. And Tarab is our webmaster. So Tarab is always great to bounce things off of, and any technical problems he resolves. But I don't want people to think of him as just our technical person, because he does contribute a lot of our thought process to how the group operates. So thanks to my board members that are on. The next thing I want to cover is tonight's meeting. So this, some of you need CDUs. CDUs are continuing development units. If you already have an IABA certification, you need to meet their CDU requirement to continue to maintain that certification. I highly suggest you do, because if you don't, then you need to get recertified. And to be recertified, you need to get PDUs, which are professional development units. It's a different level of engagement, and they're definitely harder to attain. So, but tonight, because it's an hour-and-a-half meeting, you'll get 1.5 CDUs. And your proof of that is this agenda, which is posted out to our website. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, it says that you get the 1.5 CDUs. We also have some sponsors. So Blue Shield and VSP were great sponsors, and they still are, but they were great sponsors back when we needed rooms to hold our in-person meetings and hold them for free. So hopefully someday in 2023, we'll start to get back to some of these in-person meetings. We also have Experis as a great partner, and Nora O'Reilly's on the phone now, or in the meeting, and I'll refer to her in just a minute. And then we have Netmind, who provides us with speaking opportunities. So we kind of plug them. And Jason will probably be plugging your new business. We could talk about that later as one of our sponsors, because we appreciate your engagement with us and speaking. The next thing that we do here is sort of a little bit of an open forum where we talk about job opportunities. And we usually start with Experis to tell us just how does the job market look, any opportunities that you might have. Nora, I know that Carl sent me a couple of things, including project management openings. So I don't know if you have something prepared, but I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, Bob. So we are hiring. If anybody out there knows anyone who's looking for work, I just listed my email address in the chat. But absolutely, there's a very strong job market going on for both on-site and remote, project management, BAs, development space. So if IT, we're all engaged in different groups and business units. So if you know anyone that's looking for work and anything technology, please feel free to reach out. Our team is super dedicated locally. And one thing that I just wanted to share is Experis, which we're part of Manpower Group. We were just recently recognized as a leader and a star performer with the Everest Group, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Everest Group, but they're a US-based, they evaluate companies like ours, professional staffing companies, on market success, vision, delivery capabilities. And we were named both as a star performer and a leader across business transformation, enterprise, cloud infrastructure, digital workspace, and cybersecurity. So we're very proud of that, of our achievement, and also our commitment. And that's one of the reasons why we've been a continuous sponsor of IIBA, as well as some other groups locally, but really just getting out in the community, and hopefully with the pandemic, changing things, it's been difficult, but we are wanting to connect with folks that are looking for work, and also with our clients. So feel free to reach out on any level if you have interest in finding work, or someone. And I also want to just put a small plug in for a role that we have for any of your kids that they don't need any experience, but Intel is hiring right now, and we need to find somebody that's 18. They don't need to have any experience, but if they're interested in that, they need to be on site in Folsom. So anyway, I don't want to keep going on, but just wanted to let you know there's lots of opportunities. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nora. So now we kind of open it up to anyone else that may have job opportunities. And, if your company is hiring and you don't want to speak up at the moment, I put my email address in the chat. So if you could send me information about job openings, and we do have a section in our IIBA website where we post job openings. So, you can do it that way, but I'll also kind of open the floor. Hopefully it won't be a free for all. It usually isn't. But does anyone else have any job opportunities that you want to speak up about? And if you do, you could also put it in the chat and have people contact you, at your email address. So thank you for that. Upcoming events. So our last event of the year is going to be November 16th, and typically the third Wednesday of the month at 5:30. We have a couple of great options that Steve is exploring now. That's why it says topic and speaker TBD. We're pretty far down the path of, getting there to get the topic and speaker. So more to come on that. December, usually in December, we don't have a meeting because it's a busy time of year for everyone. And we also skip usually June, because that's a time of year that people are vacationing, getting out of school, and just need a break. And it helps our board get a break too. All right. So without further ado, and almost on schedule, a minute or two late, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Jason Roberts. Jason has been a great supporter of our group. He spoke, as some of you heard earlier, a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and gave us some great insight. And we have him here tonight to talk about polarity thinking. So this is going to help you think of things in a different way. And, when I first heard the term quantum physics, I'm like, oh, that's physics. It has to do with like force and motion and all that. And then you find out, and we've been watching Quantum Leap too, the new series. But then you find out quantum physics is a little bit weird because, a lot of people think sometimes the answer to a question is yes or no. And with quantum physics, the answer is yes and no, right? So it stretches the way that you think about things. So Jason's going to talk about polarity thinking tonight, and how it's going to help you be more successful in your job. Jason's a consultant and executive coach. He has a passion for just helping leaders, teams, and really everyone, and is willingly sharing his knowledge. He's worked with a lot of different organizations, especially in the area of organizational development and some planning, worked with a lot of leadership, does coaching and team dynamics. And after 10 or so years, he's looking at forming, and I think you probably already formed, you could tell us, Jason, but his own organization on leadership development and coaching called Think Dev. So without further ado, Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for showing up. And I really like the quantum physics. And I don't know if it's just physics or general, I don't know. But that's a great kind of example of there are things that are kind of concrete, and then there's things that tend to act differently. And to understand them, it's easier if we can shift our mindset to think differently, to be able to understand what's happening in different realms. And yes, I am opening up this month. We are going to do our website launch late next week for a new organization called ThinkDev, which will be doing a lot of leadership development, content, training, coaching. I won't talk too much about that because I'm here to talk to you about polarity thinking. And I'll share my screen here. We got some slides that are going to help us go through this. We'll do some interactive activities. Couple things before I jump into this. This is the very first model that I learned in consulting. I worked for the organization that developed this model and did a lot of my training, training consultants in how to use it. So it's very near and dear to my heart as one of the first models that I learned and still use to this day in a lot of my consulting engagements. I might say some things today that your reaction initially might be, that's not how things work, or that would not work in my organization. Excellent. If you have that reaction, my hope is you interrupt me. You either unmute yourself and go, Jason, 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 until I stop talking, or you put it in chat. There's no way that would work, whatever it is, because I will then say, tell me more. And one of two things will happen. Either as you're telling me more, I'll say, oh yeah, in that context, this would not work. This is not the right thing to do. You were absolutely right. Or I will realize I have done a poor job explaining something. I will be able to explain it in a different way that might be more useful for you. And then we both learn. But if you just sit back and go, yeah, that would never work, and then never tell me, you don't get to learn more. I don't get to learn more. I go home and cry to my wife. It's a whole thing. So please, if you've got questions, just put them in chat. Feel free to interrupt me. If you have pushback, if you disagree, feel free to throw that all out there. I think we'll have a more robust learning experience with all of that. Sound good? He said, hoping for interaction.
Sounds good, Jason.
Yes,
Sounds good,
you got it. All right, cool.
Sounds awesome.
Here we go. Oh, also, last caveat. I'm drinking water out of something that looks like a tall can of beer. It is just water. It's not alcohol. No need to be concerned. All right. First thing here. Polarity thinking. We're going to talk about this in kind of three different ways. What is the mindset of both and, the skill set we want to develop, and the tool set that can help us make this actionable. They are all distinct and important. If we are not able to train our brains to see things and think in both and terms, we're going to just miss the opportunity, right? So just like things that are either or, and we'll talk more about this as we go along, either or things, regular problem solving, a lot of what we do when we're doing analysis follows rules of logic. And most of our education teaches us those rules of logic. And we get really, really good at applying those to problems, even complex problems, and finding solutions. When things are not a problem to solve, when they are not either or, we have to apply different rules. So when we're thinking about things that are both and, it has a different set of logic. It has its own logic. So when we apply either or logic, which we're trained to do very, very well, to something that's a both and, we run into trouble. So I'm going to talk a lot about how can we try to see things and think in both and terms. Once we can see it, that's great, right? We're partway there. But unless we can communicate those in those terms to other people and get them to see it as well, we're kind of stuck, right? It's just us. We're an army of one at that point. And so our ability to influence and have an impact on organizations isn't that high. So we want to be able to see it when it's a both and. Then we want to be able to talk about it in both and terms. How can we share that with people in a way that doesn't create resistance, or at least is able to diffuse resistance when it comes up? And then lastly, what is the tool that we can use to help make this easier for us to work with and to communicate it with other people? So we're going to talk a little bit about all three of these, really focusing on the mindset for the time today, because I think that's kind of the most critical aspect. And with a short time, that's where I'm focusing most of our time and prioritizing. We're going to touch on all three. Okay. So what is a polarity? What we're calling a polarity in these terms and in this session today is really a set of two or more things. We're going to focus on two, keep it simple, pairs of values, competencies, things that need each other over time. You cannot have one without the other in a sustainable way. That's what it means to be interdependent. And that's what we're talking about with polarities. A lot of times in research around organizations and processes and teams, they talk about them as paradoxes or wicked problems, opposite strengths, chronic tensions, a lot of different words. These are all getting at that same idea. What are things that are interdependent, need each other over time? So when we're talking about dependencies, there's what is kind of the parent objective, and then what is dependent on that happening first, right? And usually when we have dependency, this thing, the priority thing, can exist without the sub-objective, without the dependent objective, right? It can stand on its own. The dependent one cannot, right? When things are interdependent, it's not that same hierarchical way. We have to be able to do both. The other interesting thing about this is I'm not going to tell you anything that will be brand new. This is nothing that you're not already doing more or less well. If you are here, you're showing up, you're engaged, you are a living, breathing human, you have some level of career success, you are doing these things already, right? Just naturally. But what we want to be able to do is bring awareness to how they operate, how these systems work, so we can be explicit and intentional about how we interact with them. And when we can be intentional, we can get better results. We can achieve results faster and also with more sustainability at the same time when we're able to be intentional about these processes, right? So it's not going to be like, oh, here's a brand new way of viewing the world or of interacting with the world, but it's going to kind of hopefully reframe how you're seeing things that you're already doing so you can get more with the same thing. It really is kind of that cliche, do more with less idea, when we're actually able to leverage things that are both and with more intentionality. Okay, quick difference, then we're gonna do a quick activity so I don't just lecture at you this whole time. All right, so differences between problems and polarities. Problems have one right answer or more than one independent right answers. So when we're solving problems, right, the easiest example is math problems. 2 + 2 is 4. It has one answer, right? All other things aside, 2 + 2 is 4. We also can solve problems like which system do we want to implement for procurement software? Right? There are a lot of ways to solve that problem, but they are usually independent of one another. We're probably not going to implement, I don't know, what's a good procurement software? I'm blanking, I should use a different example. But we're not going to use both different types, right? If I'm going to pick a cell carrier, I'm not going to get AT&T and T-Mobile, right? I'm probably going to pick one. So those are problems to solve. They have one answer that's correct, or there are multiple ways to solve them, but they're independent of one another. We don't have to do both. And rarely would we even want to. Other example, if we were going to travel to Tahoe together, if we're going to all get together and drive up there, we could all take a bus and go up in the bus. We could caravan in different cars, right? There's a lot of different ways we could do that, but we're not going to take a bus and our own cars, right? That just wouldn't make sense. So those are problems to solve. Polarities have two right answers that are interdependent. So we can only focus on one of those answers for a period of time. That period might be 2 years. That period might be 2 minutes. But we can only focus on that answer for a set amount of time before we have to focus on the other answer. We cannot just pick one and set it and forget. And that's really the main distinction. Problems to solve, we can pick one answer. Polarities, we have to be able to use both answers at the right time. Any questions on this difference before we play with it a little bit.
Can you give an example of a polarity where you need 2 answers?
Yes, we are going to do that next.
Sorry.
So as if setting me up perfectly, I'll pay you later. Let's do that. And we're going to do that through breathing. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for a second. So breathing, you've been doing it this whole time, hopefully, and doing it more or less well. So let's explore breathing a little bit more intentionally. So if you could sit in your chair, feet grounded, I'm going to give you direction on how to breathe. So don't try to like beat the system. And, you know, those of you who do yoga and do all this breath work and are excellent at controlling your breath, this is not the time to show off. Okay. So what I'm going to ask you to do, don't do it yet, but in a minute, I'm going to ask you to inhale. And when I say inhale, what I would like you to do is inhale very deeply, very quickly, something like this. Right? And just inhale really fully and deeply. Then I'm going to say, keep inhaling, keep inhaling, keep inhaling. And then at some point, I'm going to say, okay, exhale. And when I say exhale, I want you to exhale fully and quickly, right? Like this. And get all the air out as quickly as you can. And I'm going to say, keep exhaling for some amount of time. And I'm going to say, breathe normally. All right. So again, this is not about beating the system by doing slow breaths. It's about really fully inhaling deeply, fully exhaling. And at the same time, if you feel lightheaded, just breathe normally, right? Don't be a hero. You don't have to pass out. It's just a quick activity. Any questions about what I'm going to ask you to do with your breathing?
No questions.
Nope.
Here we go. Okay. Everyone breathe in. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Okay, exhale. Keep going, 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 keep going. Okay, breathe normal. All right, I'll take a minute. Feel some blood rushing to my head. So what was that experience like in breathing in a different way than you've been breathing this whole time? You put it in chat, you can unmute yourself. What was it like?
I had to focus on it. Like I couldn't really think of anything else. I just had to like focus on making sure I could do what you're instructing me to do.
All right, so this thing that you're doing kind of subconsciously all the time, when we're trying to do it differently, when you're bringing some intentionality to it, you had to really, really focus. Excellent. Excellent. And put it in, Larry put in chat here, very different, out of our normal habit of breathing. Absolutely. What
Yeah,
else
at
was
some
like?
point you kept saying keep inhaling, and I'm like, I can't. I'm inhaled as much as I can.
So what was that
Same
like
with
when you're,
exhaling too.
yeah, when you hit that point of, all right, I can't anymore, what was that experience like?
I don't want to say it was like a panic, but it's like awkward. Like I know I'm supposed to keep inhaling, but I know I can't.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
can't, right? And then Fondu put outside of the comfort zone, and Celeste struggled a little, right? It becomes a struggle, becomes uncomfortable. Right? It's difficult. And so like physically, it's just, you can physically feel how uncomfortable it is to keep trying to do this thing that you are completely maxed out. And Brian put, keep looking for ways to expand the way to inhale, exhale. Like, all right, I'm looking outside. Is there anything else I have here that I can pull in? And Greg put, forces you to push beyond the perceived limits, right? So you maybe got a little bit more than you thought was possible, which is great. But still, no matter how much farther beyond what you thought possible, at some point you hit a wall. And then when you exhale, when I was telling you to inhale, 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 and then I said, okay, exhale, what did that feel like right when I told you to exhale?
It was like relief.
Yeah.
Relief. And we got double agreement in chat. Relieved, relief. And then Travis, were you about to say something?
Fantastic.
Oh, fantastic. You're like, oh, thank God, here we go.
Yeah.
Right. And then that didn't last very long, because at some point I said, keep exhaling. And what happened? Yeah, Denise put in chat, until I can't do it anymore. Right. right back in that same discomfort. It doesn't feel good anymore. I'm at my capacity. So inhaling felt good at first, and then you hit this point where it doesn't feel good anymore. And then you get to exhale, and it's like, oh, this is so relieving. But then when you keep exhaling, you hit another point where this doesn't feel good anymore. And so inhaling and exhaling is an example of a polarity, right? It's the most obvious one we have. If I asked you to pick what's your favorite inhaling and exhaling, that's all you're going to do for the rest of your life. It doesn't matter what you're going to pick, you're not going to live very long. Breathing, inhaling and exhaling is not a problem to solve. It is a polarity to leverage that you're already leveraging. And you were doing it not subconsciously, unconsciously, right? While you're sitting here listening, you weren't paying attention to it. And you were doing it in whatever rate was needed to sit here and pay attention. If I asked you to get up and run around the block, the rate of your breathing, the depth of the inhales or exhales, that's all going to change because you're trying to achieve a different goal. And the more we bring intentionality to our breathing, the more we can decide what are those limits of inhaling and exhaling. If we can practice that, we're able to get more oxygen on each breath in, then we can run farther, we can run faster, we can run longer, whatever it is. So this is an example of a polarity, and let's look at how it looks in that cycle of interdependence. So going back to the slides here. When we're breathing, this is what we're doing. We inhale, and when we inhale, we get oxygen, which we need to live. So inhaling is saving our lives. But at some point, we reach the natural limit of that benefit from inhaling. And our lungs are at capacity, and we have no more room to get more oxygen. We just can't get more oxygen anymore. We are tapped out. And if we just keep inhaling and we don't stop, that benefit starts to become a negative, and we get into a downside. Because as we're getting oxygen in, our body is building up too much carbon dioxide, which is killing us. So inhaling, first saving our life, then the same thing that was saving our life just seconds ago is killing us. So what do we have to do? We have to exhale, and we purge that carbon dioxide, and it feels great. But at the same time, when we keep purging and purging and purging, at some point, we have no more oxygen left. And we don't have this benefit of exhaling anymore. We're starting to dip into this downside, and we're over focusing on exhaling. We don't have enough oxygen. And so the thing that was saving us by purging poison was keeping us from getting oxygen. So we have to inhale. And we are just going through this infinity loop here between these two over and over and over and over. And it doesn't stop. This is how all interdependent systems work all the time, every time. They are unavoidable, they're indestructible, they're unstoppable. They just are. No one's choosing to deal with the interdependency of breathing. It's just happening with all of us. And a lot of these things are happening around us, whether or not we're aware of them as interdependent systems. So breathing is like the best example that I can have. And then Larry, I saw you put in chat here, feedback loop. Can you say more about that?
Well, that's an area, Jason, common in areas of environmental sustainability, overshoot, where an actual one is pray and prayed, which is studied a lot in field studies. I don't have to go into this, but populations get too big and then they die off, and you also have the predators dying off because they can't find enough prey. A very simple example, but that's what I was getting at.
Yeah, it's a great example, right? So you've got predator and prey, which have a symbiotic relationship. And if you introduce too many predators into a system with not enough prey, at first the predators win. They eat all the prey. But then when there's no prey left, the predators die off or start eating each other. Right. And at the same time, if somehow all of the predators die off, then the prey, they populate so much that there's not enough in the environment to sustain them, and then they start to die off. So that is the system of going back and forth. in a very aggressive symbiotic way. So symbiotic relationships can be looked at in this interdependent system, right? Because symbiosis is a form of interdependence. That's a great example. What questions do we have about breathing or about this as an example of interdependence? And did I answer someone? I forget who it was. I'm sorry. Asked the question. Maybe it was Stephen. What's an example of a polarity? Does this give you what you were looking for?
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Right. So you might be saying at this point, yeah, that's cool. That's interesting. Breathing, yay, whatever. How does this apply to work? We're going to get there. I promise. Another great example of polarity that I think is simple for everyone to understand is, he said, trying to advance this slide, activity and rest. This is another polarity that you are all managing more or less well, right? You're awake. Hopefully you're awake enough to be paying attention. So you have at some point in the recent past rested, and now you are active. And at some point you're going to rest again, and then you're going to be active again. We are all doing this. And when we're in this system, when we are being active, we are stimulating or challenging ourselves, whether it's mental activity or physical activity. So when we're in that aspect of activity, we're getting stimulated and challenged, and that's a benefit. It's good for us. But if we over-focus on mental or physical activity, we get tense, we get overwhelmed, and we get burnout. When we get burned out or we get tense and overwhelmed, we need to take some downtime to rest. And when we're resting, we get the benefits of being relaxed, rejuvenated, and we get recovery. But if all we do is sit around and do nothing, we end up getting bored, we end up losing energy, and we get atrophy. So all of us are doing this more or less well. Some of us might be feeling more burned out right now than others. Some of us might be like, yeah, I've been kind of on vacation, or I've been kind of checked out, or I haven't really been kind of phoning it in at work. I feel kind of bored. My job right now isn't really stimulating. And we might be more in this downside. But most of us, we're doing more or less well of getting up, moving around, and being able to give ourselves enough downtime to at least sustain a little more activity. So the way we're doing this and leveraging this tension back and forth is very different than the way professional athletes leverage activity and rest. Because professional athletes don't just plan their workouts. They plan their rest and downtime. They plan their cold bath, their massage therapy, their sleep. All of their recovery is just as planned as their activity, because it is just as important. Because the more rest I get, the more prepared I am for that next very strenuous amount of activity. And I can actually engage more in activity because I'm resting. And the more I really wear myself out with activity, the more exhausted I am, the more ready I am to get that rest. And so we can do more when we're intentional about both of these than when we're just going along, subconsciously dealing with this and just going, oh, I'm tired, I should probably sleep or just drink coffee, right? Oh, I'm feeling burned out. Yeah, but I can't rest because I have a deadline. You can only go so far before your body gets sick and forces you to not go to work, right? Your immune system taps out and goes, we can't do this anymore. Give this person a cold, make them feel terrible, so they finally rest, right? It's kind of built into us. So just like breathing, activity and rest, we are doing this all the time. We cannot avoid it. And how well we do this in relationship with one another sets the limits and boundaries of what we're able to achieve. So when we're looking at things that are interdependent, if we don't pay attention to them, they can really bring us to our knees and really limit our ability to grow and prosper. When we do pay attention to them, like in the case of activity and rest and professional athletes, we can achieve things that people might not have thought were possible. So it's really important that when things are both and, we recognize it and we treat it accordingly. Questions about this example, about the importance of looking at things that are both and in a way that is both and? How you all doing?
It makes sense.
Cool. All right. Got a thumbs up. Love it. Okay, so let's look at how that works in terms of creating virtuous cycles or avoiding vicious cycles. So we look at activity and rest. I'm going to kind of talk through what I just talked about as really being important of leveraging both. So quick example for activity and rest. I have a friend who likes to run marathons because he's crazy. No, I'm kidding. He's great. But I just would never run a marathon. Not my cup of tea. So he likes to run marathons. Has qualified for the Boston Marathon 3 times, only ran in it twice. The reason was the third time he qualified, he really wanted to beat his time. And so he thought, well, if I want to beat my time, I have to train harder. I have to run longer. So where was my friend focusing in this interdependent system? Anyone?
Focusing on the activity.
Focusing on activity, right? Treated it like an either or, unintentionally. But it made logical sense. If I want to be able to run faster, I need to practice running faster. I need to do that more. That's how I'm going to get better. But the thing that happened is he ran so much more without getting the adequate rest in between those runs, got injured, then wasn't able to run in the Boston Marathon. So the thing that he was doing to reach his goal that made logical sense actually kept him from even being able to have a chance to compete. That's how paradox works. To get more of the thing we want, sometimes it's more important to focus on the opposite to set ourselves up for success. That's the paradoxical nature of this. And it's why it's so easy for us to miss it and to misdiagnose it. Because we are so trained at following logic and going, well, I want to run more, so I should run more. Yep, that checks out. And we don't double check if there's anything else, if there's a bigger picture we should focus on. So the way that works is when we do more activity, we get better at doing activity, right? I do activity, I'm pressing myself, I'm pushing myself, I'm able to see what that capacity is, right? Someone earlier mentioned as I breathe in, I found I had a little more capacity than I thought, right? I'm pushing myself with that inhale. And then if we give ourselves adequate rest, if we really let ourselves exhale all the way out, then we can get more activity. We can get more when we inhale. We're able to do more because we rested. So we actually end up ratcheting up to get more of both. It's not a zero-sum game here. And that's what we call a virtuous cycle. I'm doing the right amount of activity in the right time in relation to the right amount of rest in the right time. And as a result, over time, I can do more of both. I can push myself harder when I go work out or when I'm at work and I'm challenging my brain. And then I'm so exhausted, I get better rest when I try to go to sleep. Virtuous cycles. However, in the case of my friend that over-focused on activity and didn't rest, he was pushing himself too far, got injured. And then when he was injured, couldn't go out for activity, had to rest, couldn't run. And when he couldn't run, he got muscle atrophy. Now, not a ton, right? It wasn't a huge deal. But once he finally recovered, was he able to run just as far as before he got injured? No, he was worse off because he couldn't do as much activity, which means he didn't get as much rest, which means he couldn't do as much activity. And it created a vicious cycle where he was worse off. That is a vicious cycle that we want to avoid. I see in chat here, Brian said, I tell athletes I coach that for big events, it's often better to be over-rested than overtrained, assuming proper training loads prior. Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. So we want to be able to see these things that are both in so we can create those virtuous cycles intentionally. And also just to make sure that we avoid these vicious cycles. Because when we get locked in these vicious cycles, it is really hard to pull out. Really, really hard. And organizations that get caught in this You can tell because they becomes crazy infighting. The culture, people will be like, wow, 6 months ago I loved working here and now it's terrible. What happened? Guaranteed you're in one or more vicious cycles that either have to do with team dynamics or the way the processes are set up, or over-focused goals that are way too focused on one area that's actually a both and. So to have sustainable goals, you need both. This is why the balanced scorecard is so great for strategic planning, because it kind of is looking at these interdependencies, right, without really realizing it. But that's why we want to be able to do this well and be intentional about it. Create vicious cycles intentionally, avoid vicious cycles that tear us down. What questions do we have about this virtuous cycle, vicious cycle theme we're talking about here? All right, let's keep going. So this is just that kind of mapped out where we've got activity and rest. We want to be able to stimulate our muscles. And when they are achy, we get exhausted. We want to be able to rest well, but we don't want to over focus on rest where we get atrophy, we get lethargic. And if we do that well, we create this virtuous cycle. We can finish the marathon. If we don't do this well, we get caught in this vicious cycle that pulls us down and we can't compete. All right. So one of the ways that this shows up in leadership. Yes. So Stephen, you put balance is key. So let's talk about that for a little bit. When you're talking about balance here, I'm going to stop sharing. Say more about where that's coming from, the balance piece.
Well, when you were talking about the inhaling and exhaling and talking about the rest and the activity, the balance between those two is what I was thinking of.
And how do you know you're in balance?
When there is progress, like you were talking about with the example of the marathon running, when you're doing both and the balance is good, then the progress should be there too. That's just my thought on that.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So it's the idea of balance. Anyone else? Thoughts about balance, how you know you're in balance, what you look for? Because I absolutely agree, balance is key.
And I just wanted to add to that because I was kind of thinking about the whole breathing technique and Stephen, that balance, that really makes sense to me. So if you have balance in your mindset at the very beginning, kind of helps you plan for those things. You know, maybe if I didn't exhale so fast, you know, it wouldn't have been so uncomfortable because I would have paced myself.
Yeah, so if I had paced myself, I might not have gotten as uncomfortable, right? And so that is goal dependent. So if your goal was to follow the activity, pacing yourself wouldn't have worked. But if your goal is to not be uncomfortable, pacing yourself is absolutely the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Right? So balance is key, and it is context and goal dependent. And it is also about the right balance of activity and rest, or whatever we're talking about, in relation to one another. So when we say balance, a lot of people think 50-50. Like, well, I'm going to do this for a little bit, then I need to do that for a little bit, so it balances out. When it comes to things that are interdependent, there might be a context where we need 90-10 for the next month. And then we're going to need 80-20. And then we're going to need 70-30. And then we're going to need 90-10 again. So when we're looking at things that are both and, what we like to talk about is dynamic balance. Because there isn't a balance point where you're like, okay, it's balancing. We hit it perfectly. The golden ratio is achieved. That's not really how things work. Because so many things are changing in the environment. What we have to be able to do is be dynamic in our responsiveness to changing contexts and changing goals. And so if we know something is a both and, we know we have to do both, then the question is, what do we do right now? Have we been neglecting one side or the other for too long? How do we do both in relationship to one another? So it's about the relationship between the interdependencies we're playing with, not necessarily about finding a perfect balance point.
Okay.
Not that that's what you were implying, Stephen, but I think it's a really important point about balance when it comes to this.
Great point. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Great question. I love this. Okay. Can you tell I'm kind of a nerd about this? All right. So let's go back and we'll talk about a leadership one here. So in leadership, right, it's really important that we have leaders that are highly visionary. And when we have a leader that's highly visionary, or when we're able to be visionary ourselves, we get to be flexible in responding to new challenges. We get to stimulate innovation and creativity in ourselves and in our teams. And we get satisfaction and energy from creating those new opportunities. March 2020 took a lot of visionary to figure out what to do. We're like, how are we going to handle this? We had to be able to be visionary and see things a new way to make it happen. At the same time, if all we do is sit around and try to generate creative, innovative things and have great visions and just, wax poetic about life, at some point, we're going to end up with lack of direction. Projects are not going to get completed, and our team is going to be overwhelmed and frustrated because every time they come to us, we go, don't do that anymore. What if we did this? What if we did this? What if we did this? And that's going to cause problems. So is being visionary good or bad? It's neither, right? Is inhaling good or bad? It's neither. It's context dependent. Being visionary is interdependent with being focused. When we're focused as leaders, we give clear direction. We help people push things across the finish line and get complete. And we get satisfaction for ourselves and our teams from a sense of accomplishment. But if all we do is stay focused, right, we get tunnel vision, then we end up rigidly in a rut. We're not able to be responsive. We don't have innovation and creativity. It's like, no, don't do it that way. We've been doing it this way. This way works. Stay focused. And people get bored from a lack of new opportunities. So being visionary and focused in the right balance for what the current context requires. Some roles, right, kind of as you go up in the ranks, require more visionary from you than being focused. If you're down, you're front line, you're a staff member, you need to be super focused. It's not to say you don't need any vision, but the balance that you need is very different than if you're the CEO of a Fortune 100 company. Everyone needs both, but that mix is going to look different. And if we do that mix well, if we provide a lot of vision and we're really flexible in our leadership, while providing clear direction and focus, we're able to be successful enough to create enough abundance to be able to say, okay, what's next? And then we have all these great ideas to pick from. We pick some, and then we get focused on making those happen. And then those are more likely to be successful, which gives us time and space to be more visionary. And that's the virtuous cycle. And we get to be really effective in leading our teams. But if we don't have vision, or we get way too focused, or we aren't focused enough, we're way too visionary or way too focused, we get an ineffective leader. And the team just struggles and spirals. And then people start to leave, your attrition goes up, your burnout goes up, your frustration goes up. It's all bad. So this shows up in competencies of leadership. And even though a lot of what we're doing, right, as business analysts and in looking at process, if we're not able to be focused on the work while looking for new opportunities to improve, we're not going to be as effective. We need to be able to do both. I'm going to break here for questions before I start talking about these values and fears badges that I have up here. Questions, thoughts?
So I'll take it you're probably going to go over this later in here or in this presentation, but when you have a leader that is spiraling down one or the other roads and not really having that proper balance, how do you address that?
Excellent question. Excellent question. So normally, the way most of us just naturally are programmed is, well, we see a gap, we're going to point out the gap, and we're going to propose a solution. And this is standard gap analysis, right? So let's say we have a leader that is very visionary, right? But can't give any focus or direction, right? And so you're seeing them and you're like, every time you go to them, it's flavor of the month. It's we're going to do something new. Everything's new and exciting and interesting. Yeah, we were doing that last month. I know we put some time into it. Let's just let it go. Right? That's what you're dealing with. It's easy to say, look, here's the problem right here. I can detail it out. Here's the solution. Give me some direction here, please. And then here's the strategy. We're going to talk about this with change management in a few minutes. Here's my strategy to get you there. It's my gap analysis. Here's your problem. Here's the solution. Make it happen. And usually they go, you know what? You're totally right. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'm going to do that tomorrow. No. They get defensive. They get resistant. Or even if they say, yeah, I'm going to try that out, they don't follow through. Why is that? Well, the reason is not intellectual, right? It's emotionally driven. Because the reason, or not the reason, but one of the things that happens is when we get really good or we start to really value one side of something that's interdependent, that is our value system. And the more I value the benefit of one side of an interdependent system, the more I'm afraid of losing it. And that fear drives me to cling harder to the thing that I love. And so you're asking me to do this stuff here, but I can't. Because this being focused puts me at risk of doing this downside, right? Exhaling, purging carbon dioxide puts me at risk of not getting enough oxygen. And if I'm terrified of not having enough oxygen, I'm going to cling to inhaling, even if it's the thing that's killing me. Doesn't make logical sense. So we can't just present gap analysis and then get flummoxed when people don't buy in immediately and go, this is so logically clear. How are you not seeing this, right? Because it's not logical. It's emotional. And so when our emotions get tied up in things that are interdependent, we only see the benefits of what we want, and we only see the downside of what we're afraid of. And this is confirmation bias. So let's say I'm that visionary leader, and Greg, you're trying to help me see that I have a problem. And I'm going, look, here's all the benefits of being visionary. I can show you studies, I can show you research. Look at all these Harvard Business Review studies on the importance of being visionary. And look at all the stuff that happens when we're not visionary. You're just wrong. I have all the data to show you're wrong. And you're going, actually, here's all of the things that are showing up that are problems. And here's the solution to that problem. Let me show you all the Harvard Business Review studies on why it's important to be focused and give clear direction to your teams. But I'm not going to see that because we are trained from early on in school to think in either or terms. And if I'm talking to you, right, and we're in school and there was a math quiz and one of the questions was 3 + 3, and Greg says, yeah, I got 6. I put 6 for that. And I go, I put 9. The more sure I am that I'm right, the more sure I am that you have to be wrong. Because the idea that we're both right, that's impossible, right? If I'm right and I have the evidence to prove I'm right, you have to be wrong. So if you're telling me to not be visionary and I have all the evidence to say that I need to be, I'm not going to listen. So it puts us in kind of a conundrum because it can't be evidence-based and it can't be logical. So what do? The way we get out of that is we have to affirm people's values first. So if I have someone that's really visionary and I want them to be more focused, I don't start with, look at all the problems with what you're doing. What are you, blind? I might think that, but I'm not going to say that. I say, excellent, you are amazingly visionary as a leader. Here's all the great innovations and creativity that you've brought to the team, that you've encouraged in the team. A lot of great stuff there. And I would hate to lose that. I would hate to get in a rut, to not be creative, to not be able to be responsive and flexible. I would hate to stop these brainstorming sessions. They're a lot of fun. I get a lot out of it. I would hate to lose that. So I have affirmed the value that you bring, I've let you know I value it too. I still want it. I've affirmed and validated your fear, and I've let you know I don't want that either. And then I say, I think it would be really helpful if we could find some way to add a little bit more direction so these projects that we start actually get finished. How could we do that? Do you think that would be valuable? Do you know how much money we might save if we didn't start 10 projects and finish one, but we started 5 and finished 5? It's very different when you're trying to influence people. But I can only get to that influence point when I see the whole reality. And then I can lead you through that process, right? You're bringing value. I see that. I value it too. You have a fear. I don't want this either because I genuinely don't. I do want some of this. I think it would be helpful. Do you think it would be helpful? Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Great. And it would kind of solve some of these problems we're seeing, right? Do you see some of this? Yeah, I do see some of that. I've gotten that feedback from other people. Okay, great. So how do we keep that vision and add a little more direction? Very different conversation. Does that help you out, Greg?
More than you could imagine.
Excellent. My favorite answer. Okay. So, and that's the communication part, right? So mindset, I have to see that what this person is doing isn't illogical. He's just applying, he or she is applying both or applying either or thinking to a both and situation. I have to step back and see the whole reality. And then I need to start communicating in both and terms. Whether or not they even know I'm doing that, that's irrelevant. I use both and I use polarity thinking in every single engagement that I'm in. Only maybe 5 or 10% of my clients do I actually share the model, because the model doesn't matter. This map here, this tool, helps me organize what the interdependent system is and what's showing up. So then I get to plan out how I communicate. But it's how we communicate with both and by affirming values and validating fears first, before we advocate our position, right? This is the old cliche of seek first to understand before be understood, or then be understood. I don't. Really important part there on communicating that Greg set me up perfectly for. I'll pay you too, Greg. Any questions on that, or like other examples or things we could work through that would be helpful for it?
I come from a background of mergers and acquisitions, and find that you have to have the communication, but you have leaders that focus sometimes on migrating towards the new goal of the combined company. At the same time, they have to pay attention to the existing business and keeping that operational and serving the clients and customers while communicating to the employees so they can help keep the business operational, keep the wheels turning, and not lose the sales and the customers, while at the same time helping with that visionary and adapting to the change that's up and coming that's going to migrate them to the new company. Quite the balance. Like you said, it's not 50-50. It's those different percentages, ongoing, never stops. Those different percentages come in and out.
Yeah, very different, right? And business dependent. When I'm working with, tech startups, what do you think their balance is? They're way more visionary, and I'm trying to say, all right, let's focus in a little bit. Come on, people, because tech startups, they're all about new, creative, and all that. And it's hard to get them to focus. When I go work with state government, not the same, right? They're very focused, and this is the way we've always done it. So I'm trying to pull them to be a little bit more visionary. Now, they don't need to be as visionary as tech startups, but they need a little bit more than they have. And tech startups don't have to be as focused and as process dependent as state government needs to be, but they need more of it than they have when they're starting up. And the ones that can get that balance point right for them and evolve that balance point over time as the business matures, right? Because startups need to be way more flexible than when they grow to, $1 billion company. It's very different. So that dynamic changes, and you need leadership that's able to change with it. But what usually happens is You get startup leadership, and all of a sudden that startup leadership that did great in the beginning because they were so decentralized and responsive, all of a sudden things get replicated and redundant because it's so decentralized. And so they fire that CEO, they hire a new CEO, and that CEO goes, there's way too many silos. We need to centralize this. And they centralize all the processes, they get it all streamlined, they think they're amazing. And then over time, the organization can't be as responsive to customer needs or employee needs. So they fire that CEO, they hire a new one, and that person goes, what's with all this red tape? We need to decentralize. We need to give the power back to the people. And they spend 5 years dismantling everything that CEO set up. And then they recreate the same silos, the same problem that was fixed. And then they last 5 or 10 years, then they get fired and someone else comes in and goes, what's with all this redundancy? We need to centralize. And this is how organizations just go back and forth because they're not seeing it as a both and, they're seeing it as neither or.
And along that way, they lose employees, they lose customers, they lose sales, they lose all that along. It's all a downstream trickle effect that can happen.
And yet they're still in existence and still profitable.
Yeah.
So how much more profitable could they be if they didn't lose all of that attrition and all of that potential? Right? You can get more of what you already have wherever you are when you can see it as a both and. Great point, Denise. Great point. Okay, I got a few more things here I want to go over before my time. So let's do that. We did that. Okay, so some realities. Interdependent pairs support and need each other over time. Virtuous cycles, we talked about that. If you apply either or to a both and, you're going to get the downside of your preferred pole first. Then you'll get the downside of the thing you were trying to avoid. You will end up, this is called a self-fulfilling prophecy. You create the thing you fear. So if you look back at visionary and focused, if I want to be visionary and I focus on this, I'm going to get these problems first. But if we lack direction and projects aren't completed and staff's overwhelmed, at some point, they're going to stop innovating. They're going to stop listening to you. And then we're going to be rigidly in a rut. We're not going to have innovation because no one's actually following through. And people are going to be bored because there's no new opportunity. I'm getting the exact thing I was trying to avoid. So if you have this either or power struggle and one wins, it doesn't matter which one wins, everyone's going to lose. So when you're in a position of authority and you have that resistance, listen to that. There is wisdom in resistance. They are probably pointing out something of a both and, whether or not they realize it. So look out for that. Wisdom in resistance. Okay. So business analysis, enabling change. You know all this. We best serve our stakeholders with our recommendations by utilizing both and mindset. Whenever we're making a recommendation, we are telling them you should do it differently. All change is interdependent, exactly what Denise was talking about with mergers and acquisitions. We have to care for existing business while we build new business. But this is how we normally handle change. Here's the problem. We have stagnation. People are passive, we're losing energy, we're missing opportunities. There's a whole set of problems here. We need new energy and direction, new mergers, we need new strategic partners. Here's how we're going to solve all these problems, this new wisdom, this innovation. And we have a whole strategy. Maybe we even spin up a whole innovation team or innovation division. We dump millions of dollars into this. But there's no upside to what we're doing now. There's no potential risk with innovation. Interesting. And then you have a group of people, the change resistors. And they're going, we're doing a lot of good stuff here. Maybe you haven't noticed. And all the stuff that you're saying that we're going to do, you're probably going to bring in something new 6 months from now. And that's just causing chaos. And we're actually losing our core values in our core business. And you're taking foolish risk. If we dumped all those millions into reinforcing our current customers, well, studies show that customer retention is easier than getting customers. So what are we doing here? And they have their own strategy to undermine your effort of change. And they're going to be against you. So what we want to be able to do is see that we need stability. We need to tap into our continuity, our core values, tap past and present wisdom of how things are done without dipping into this stagnation. Now, we can't avoid it, but we want to minimize it. You can't avoid building carbon dioxide in your system when you're inhaling, but you want to minimize it. You can't avoid not being able to get oxygen when you're exhaling, but you want to minimize the damage. So we want to be able to do both. We have to anchor ourselves in a foundation of stability, which makes it easier to change. And we got to get everyone on the same page. And so just like with visionary and focused, if I have a change that I want to implement, I don't go in and say, hey, here's how your team is completely screwing up. Here's how I'm just so brilliant. Here's my new plan that's going to make you better. And here's the strategy to get there. We don't do that. It doesn't work as well. We got to influence. So we say, here's what you're doing really, really, really well. And if we try to change some things, here's some risk, right? And I want to make sure that we avoid that risk as much as possible. Here's some things I think we should do that are going to help us grow with minimal risk. Or here's the risk and here's the risk mitigation plan. But if we don't do anything, if we don't do any new stuff, we're going to end up stagnating and it's going to be a problem. So there's risk of action and there's risk of inaction. And I would rather take the risk of action and mitigate it well than sit back and just wait for everything to collapse. And that's going to help get people more on board and minimize the resistance. And they might say, actually, you missed some stuff. There's some other really good stuff here. Or I see some additional risk. And then you go, thank you. You just made my plan better. Let's add that in. And now you're all on the same team. So that's it for what I had today. We've had thinking in both and, right? Being able to see those interdependent pairs, being able to communicate it well, starting by affirming values and validating fears, then moving on to what you want. And this graphic here is what we call a polarity map. And it's just you pick your interdependent pair you're looking at. You're able to talk about the benefits and the risks and see the whole reality. So mindset, skill set, tool set. Hopefully this helps you with your influence, and I hope it's been enjoyable.
Thank you, Jason. Really appreciate it. A lot of great content, a lot for everyone to think about. Now I know where I failed in my exercise program. I just didn't do it. I was too much on the rest side. But anyway, thank you very much, Steve. I'll turn it over to you to close out the meeting and talk about the survey and maybe our next meeting. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you again, Jason. Does anybody have any other questions or comments before I jump in? We still have a few minutes. Okay, so if you still have Menti up, go ahead and jump back into that. I'm going to take you to the page where we're going to start the quiz. While we're waiting for that, within the next few days, I'll be sending out a survey. And if you could go in and take that, you get a chance to win a raffle. And we really appreciate the feedback. We'll make sure we pass all that on to Jason, and it helps us plan our events for next year. So if you have any ideas for topics for next year, or speakers that you think we should reach out to, you can give me that feedback then. So I've got 13 people in here for the quiz. I'll give you just a second. There should be sound. I'm hoping there's sound. After the quiz, then we'll do the raffle and then we call it a night. All right, 14 people. Wait, maybe we'll get 15 and then I'll start. There we go, 16, 17. Actually, I think what I'm going to do first is stop recording. We don't need this part.